So we talked about interwar mechanization last week, and now we're going to talk about interwar carrier air power. So what I'm basically identifying is what I think are the big three things from the interwar period that pay off in World War II. And the first was mechanization, tanks. The second is naval aviation. And then the third is air power. Yes, so air power, I had to think. Did you get a copy of the study guide?
I did actually, yeah, I got it the day he gave it to
Oh, you got this one? Okay, I couldn't remember. And the third is air power, but specifically bombers, okay? And then what we're gonna look at is we're gonna look at how those things pan out in World War II. With the Navy, I'm gonna throw a little twist in there, but that's what we're gonna do. So, interwar air power. So let's talk, or interwar carrier air power, I should say. So let's talk about that. The very first experiment in the United States for doing what we would call naval aviation is Eugene Ely. He takes off of the USS Birmingham, where they set up a deck, basically, built a wooden structure over the top of the deck. And he takes off on the 14th of November, 1910. So that's in the United States, our first example of carriers. I mean, it's not a carrier, but you know what I'm getting at. It's sort of a carrier-esque. The first landing is, again, Ely, who lands on the USS Pennsylvania in January 1911, and so I used to always make the really bad joke, wow, he stayed airborne for 2 months. Isn't that amazing?
I was about to make the same
Yeah. But again, he manages to both take off and land, so he gets both in there. So this is several years pre-World War I, we're already experimenting. Please.
Tangentially related, when the White Lotus did their first flight, how quickly did the military want to incorporate that technology? Oh shit, flights.
Yeah, the initial reaction is that this is not legit. This is a fluke. It's not something to be taken seriously. And again, when you look at these early aircraft, I mean, not only are they terrifying to look at in the sense of what is your chance of surviving, but on top of that, like what utility is that going to have in warfare? So for instance, the US Army, the first planes the Army buys, they give to the Signal Corps. Why the Signal Corps? Well, their thought is like they can maybe carry messages. Like that's what they'll do is they'll like write a message, quick, run it over to the airplane, give it to the pilot. Yeah, and then he's gonna take off. Well, again, we don't have voice communication yet at that point. It's all, it's all wired. You know, it's all wired. There's no, what am I saying? Not voice, wireless communications. So they think, well, if it's somewhere so far away, we can't sell a telegram, we have no cords. I give it to the pilot, he flies that 50 miles, and then he could even drop it. I mean, they come up, like during World War I, they come up with these things that look like giant darts, where there's a container inside, and you put a message, and you can just fling it down, and so that's their thought, is like communications. Yes, exactly. Exactly, it is. Absolutely. So again, now the initial reaction is, what are we going to use this for? And if we use it, it's something like that. It's maybe scouting, maybe, but you're never going to do anything other than that with it. Okay. So the first aircraft carrier, the first quote unquote real aircraft carrier is a British carrier. It's the HMS Furious in 1917. Now, here's a problem. There's this giant superstructure in the middle of the deck. And so planes land on the aft portion of the carrier and take off on the forward portion, and negotiating the plane around the superstructure is an enormous pain. So this is clearly a first try, and it doesn't work really well. Now later on, she'll be refitted after World War I, and they'll get rid of the superstructure and redo it. But the initial thing is just, this is not how you do it. Not that. And by the way, any superstructure on the deck of a carrier is contentious to today. So the newest class of aircraft carriers we have, the Gerald Ford class, Initially, they were going to have no superstructure at all. It's just going to be completely a big flat deck. And this is an argument between the flyers and the sailors. The sailors say, we need that for communications purposes, to go ahead and have line of sight and all kinds of other things. The pilots say, any superstructure is just something I'm going to run into. So the Gerald Ford compromised, and they moved the superstructure to the back right-hand side, which is starboard. So the starboard side, the aft starboard side is where they moved it to. Still not the flush deck carriers that the flyers would like, but they argue there's less to hit this way. Most of the deck is completely vacant, and there's nothing to run into.
Did they have a lot of run-ins with that first one, or any run-ins?
They did, and if you can see here, this is like a ginormous net that they put up so that when you overshoot, which is going to happen pretty frequently, nobody's going to actually strike the superstructure itself. So that's the first aircraft carrier in world history. The first true aircraft carrier, however, without that giant thing in the middle that you had, almost impossible to get around, is again a British carrier, the HMS Argus in 1918. And she is what is called a flush deck carrier. There is nothing to run into as a pilot. And everyone, all pilots, absolutely love this. She, interestingly enough, had been laid down as an ocean liner, an Italian ocean liner. And she is purchased from the Italian government by the Royal Navy and converted into an aircraft carrier. So the British are way ahead when it comes to naval aviation. But when you think about naval aviation, the British aren't who you think about. You think about us, you think about the Japanese. The Brits are not like one of the first people you think of, okay? But in fact, they sponsor the first major naval air raid in history. Now you remember the Zeppelins that are bombing London? Remember me mentioning kind of offhandedly that the first bombing of London is the Zeppelins. So what happens is, they're located here in occupied, in what was then Germany, but now is Denmark, in Toten, the O has a thingy in it, so I'm not sure how to pronounce that in Danish. Anyway, so they've got these hangars, okay, over here that have the Zeppelins in them. And they sponsor this air raid, okay, where they launch the planes from here so that they won't be spotted coming in. And they come in and burn the hangars and quite a few of the Zeppelins themselves during this air raid. So this is the first major naval aviation air raid that is very successful and destroys the hangars and several of the Zeppelins as well. So this is 1918. So we've already got examples before World War I is over that this naval aviation thing, this could be interesting. This could really change things. Now, arguably, it's not until about halfway through World War II that everyone says, yeah, this is the thing, naval aviation. You want naval aviation. If you got a Navy, you want aircraft carriers, you want that stuff. Now, let me go back for a second. I said, well, the Brits are the leaders, but we don't think of the Brits as the leaders. So what the heck happened? Well, the Royal Naval Air Service, which is just within the Royal Navy, in the course of the war, they go from 100 officers to 550, and from 5,000 men to 55,000 men, just over the course of the war. Okay? And aircraft from 93 to almost 3,000 aircraft. So they have this major expansion. They are the world leaders in everything. And then the Royal Air Force, the RAF, is formed. Okay? Until 1918, you have the Royal Naval Air Service and you have the Royal Flying Corps of the Army. So you have each service, the Navy and the Army, have their own air forces. And then they create a separate air force, and what they do is they strip both of the services of all their aviators. So for a few years, they're trying to figure, the Navy literally has no pilots and no planes. They still have carriers, but they have no pilots and planes. And they're trying to figure out, like, okay, so we're gonna have Royal Air Force pilots on Navy ships, but landing on a carrier is way different than landing on a field. And it creates absolute chaos. In the late 20s, they finally get permission to reestablish the Royal Naval Air Service, but they basically have to start from scratch. So when it comes to World War II, the Royal Navy is still flying biplanes, canvas-covered biplanes. There's a famous attack that the Royal Navy sponsors in 1940 or 41 at Taranto in Italy, not Toronto, Canada, but Taranto in Italy, in which they attack the Italian fleet and sink a good chunk of the Italian fleet. And the planes they're using are Swordfish, which are canvas-covered biplanes. They're dropping torpedoes from canvas-covered biplanes in 40 or 41, I think it's 40, okay? And that shows you how much behind the power curve now the Royal Naval Air Service is.
So first
They were awesome. They were the best in the world.
but then something happened in the Navy.
They pulled them all out, put them all in this new Royal Air Force. And so you lost all your experienced pilots, all your equipment, all your service crews, everybody who was associated with aviation. You don't have anybody. And for almost 10 years, they said you can't even have anybody. You're not allowed to have planes. You're not allowed to have pilots. You're not allowed to have mechanics. You're not allowed to have any of that. You're not allowed to buy planes, nothing. And so they start from scratch again. And what happens is once we get into the war, we basically just start giving them our stuff. So by the end of the war, they're flying Corsairs and stuff like that, with the kind of planes that the US Navy's flying. By 1945, almost all the planes the Royal Navy are flying are US planes. That's how far behind they are. They have to take all of our stuff because they literally have nothing. This becomes a cautionary tale for the US Navy. So what happened to the Royal Navy becomes a cautionary tale for the US Navy. And I'm going to show you 3 quotes from 3 different admirals about this whole naval aviation thing, what it is and what's going on with it. And again, as with all quotes, I'm not expecting you to remember the quote. I'm just trying to give you the feel of the time, all right? So first, making a decision with only a little bit of data. What do you do with that? Well, this is Rear Admiral David Taylor. So yes, they were the leaders. The British were the leaders and all that. But when you really look at the span of World War I, the Navy, other than the German U-boats, not a lot of stuff going on with the navies. There's submarine warfare and anti-submarine warfare, but aside from that, okay, yeah, they do that one big raid, okay, but not a lot of other stuff. So presentism is always a problem for historians. We always know that things worked because we know how it happened. And unfortunately, far too often, even decent historians will fall into this whole trap of saying, well, it was obvious it was going to work. Not if you're there. Not if you're in the middle of it. It's not obvious how that's going to work. And so if you only have a little bit of data to work from, which arguably the navies of the world did not come out of World War, even though the ground forces came out with all those lessons, and we talked about all those lessons, the navies come out of World War I with
Almost nothing.
yeah, except for submarine warfare and anti-submarine warfare. There aren't that many big, there's Jutland. For the sea guys, that's it. For the guys who are actually the surface ship guys, that's it, they got Jutland. And for the air guys, they got that one raid, and that's kind of it there. So we go and look, oh, this is awesome, they burned down these sheds, clearly it's gonna be great. Well, to everybody looking at it, okay, it was important once. So how much money do we spend on it in the interwar period?
None.
Yeah. I mean, how much faith do we have in that? So that's true for the Navy. That's true in many other circumstances. It's really easy for us to look back and go, well, clearly this was the important thing, whatever the thing is. But at the time, very often it's not that clear.
Especially when you're trying to convince politicians to spend money on it. Even
All
if
those
you-
things we talked about.
Even if you believe in it.
All those things we talked about. You got all this leftover junk from the last war. You got blah, blah, you know, all those that list we went over. Absolutely.
Use up your old crap first.
Yeah, exactly. You got to use up all that old junk. I'm not buying anything new. In the future, this is Rear Admiral William Fulham. He is at a performance display, whatever you want to call it, of a bunch of aircraft. Okay, he's there for this demonstration, and this is what he says after he watches this demonstration. This is 1918. Now, this is a forward-thinking guy. Because how do you think every other admiral watching this thing, what do you think every other admiral thought?
Who cares?
Nice shoulders, though.
Look at how rickety those things are.
You know.
Come on. Those are going to sink a battleship? Give me a break. I could have a bolt-action rifle. I could shoot those things down with a bolt-action rifle. Come on.
You know, lightning.
Yeah. Were you about to say something?
Yeah, this is about the planes, right?
Yeah.
How high in the sky are these planes usually flying at?
Well, they're much lower than we would have nowadays because they don't have oxygen. They don't have enclosed cockpits. They don't have oxygen. They don't have any of that.
Yeah, that audio reminds me of a whole Chinese balloon that said, "Oh, people just shoot it down." Like, things like 12,000 feet in the air. When I was rifled, it was like 1,500.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so this guy's forward-looking to say, hey, these are really a risk. But most of the other admirals are looking at these things, these rickety biplanes, and going, they don't fly that high. They're really low. We can easily shoot them down. What are you getting worried about? Okay. One last thought about joint cooperation. Another guy who's forward-looking. Because he is exactly afraid of what's going to happen in the Navy is what happened to the Royal Navy. They're going to strip us of all our aviation, all that stuff. They're going to create a separate, he's calling it the Air Ministry. He means a separate Air Force. And from his point of view, this is going to be devastating. And we do not want that.
So when he said the air ministry is established with a medieval institution, what is a very antique obsolete?
Yeah, exactly. That we, the Navy, if they strip us of all our aviation, we're going to be worthless. Because he sees the aviation, which is amazing because he's the former chief of naval operations. So this guy's in his 60s. So for a 60-something-year-old guy in this era to be that forward-looking and say, no, this aviation thing is really important. We got to get on the bandwagon here. Again, very forward-thinking guy. Because almost all the other admirals are dismissing it. It's all a bunch of whatever, you know. But again, he saw what happened with the Brits, and he does not want that to happen in the Navy. By the way, this theme will continue all the way until after World War II. When the U.S. Air Force is created, after World War II, this is an aside, okay, this is not something you're going to worry about on a test, but when the U.S. Air Force is established in 1947, one of the big arguments is, do they get everything that flies? And the Navy, the admirals band together, because by 1947 they know naval aviation that's it. I mean, that's the most important thing for the Navy. They sponsor what's called the Revolt of the Admirals. And what happens is, President Truman was very big on the idea of making the services what we call today purple, meaning we're gonna mix all the colors together, and we're all gonna be one big service. And some will be to the air part, some will be to the ground part, some will be to the sea part, but we're all just gonna be one giant service. There's not gonna be separate Navy, Air Force, Army, Marines. It's gonna be one big thing. And again, the Navy looks at this and goes, this is gonna be a disaster. We saw what happened with the Brits, it's gonna be a disaster. And so a large group of admirals basically go to the president and say, if you push forward with this idea, what we're gonna do is we're all gonna resign our commissions, put on suits and ties, call a press conference, and say that you are destroying national defense and we will lose the next war because of this. Now, Truman personally was furious.
Yeah.
He said privately, I would have every one of them hung if I could. But
That's a little bit better.
But he knew that if they did that, if they went ahead and did resign and call a press conference,
So screwed.
he was toast. So he pulls back and lets the Navy keep its aviation. The Army, because the Army sucks, did not rally around the flag like that, and so the Army lost everything. And it's only because of the perfection, meaning to have perfected, not meaning it is perfect, to have fixed helicopters, that the Army has any aviation. Because if it hadn't been for helicopters, the Army would be desperately calling for the Air Force to do every single thing for them. Please.
Which president would have hung them?
Quite a few in the past would have hung them if they got the chance.
I bet
Absolutely.
Jackson will.
Oh, yeah, Andrew Jackson would have been a heartbeat, yeah.
So he didn't pull a Washington and give him a stern talking, how disappointed he is in them?
Nope, nothing like that. So again, this controversy goes all the way to 1947. It doesn't end until 1947 when the Navy is given permission, okay, you can keep your stuff. But the Army, like the idiots they are, just kind of belly up and say, okay, don't hurt me. Okay, anyway. So I want to bring a figure into this, okay? And the figure is Rear Admiral William Moffett. I want to bring him into this equation, all right? William Moffett is the senior naval aviator in the U.S. Navy in the immediate post-war period. He's a senior naval aviator. But he's an older dude. He's not a young guy. He's a 2-star admiral. That's pretty up there. And in addition to his naval wings, you probably can't tell, but can anybody think what this ribbon is?
It's the Medal of Honor.
It's the Medal of Honor. Okay? So here is an old dude who grew up in the battleship Navy. He's a sea guy. He's not an air guy. He's got the Medal of Honor. But he is one of these converts to aviation. And he realizes early on how important naval aviation is going to be in the future. And we historians have gone back, looked at what he did, and come up with what we call the Moffett strategy. I am not claiming Moffett had this written down. It's 5 points. But I'm not claiming he had little sheets he gave out to people like, here's the 5-point strategy. This is something historians, much smarter than I did, looked at this guy and said, here's how you get innovation in your service successfully. Because there's the Billy Mitchell model we'll talk about in the next lesson. And then there's the William Moffett. Both of these guys want aviation. Their methods are diametrically opposed. And he gets what he wants relatively quickly, relatively painlessly. Mitchell's takes another 20 years, and he ticks off every single person he meets along the way. So this is the Moffett strategy. And I would point out to you guys, I'm not talking just if you're in the military. This strategy, in my opinion, would work in business. This would work in government. This would work anywhere. Okay, so let's go through this and I'll show you why I think it works anywhere. Number one, you want a high-ranking sponsor for your idea. You have an idea, an innovation, whatever you want to call it, okay? And you want to successfully sell it to your company, your government, your branch of service. You want to find a high-ranking sponsor. Now, within the context of this, of naval aviation in the United States, in the Navy, what is the best high-ranking sponsor you can find for your idea?
President.
Good guess. Most people guessed that initially, but no. Why not the president? What can he not do?
Oh, he's not gonna be here forever, right?
He's not going to be there forever. That's one thing. And the other thing he can't do is money.
The Congress.
Congress. So a congressperson, that is the best person to get for your sponsor. You could be in Congress forever.
Like the Roman said.
Yes, I mean,
True that.
the number of people in Congress who have been there longer than I've been alive, okay? That's not even a joke. I bet you there's a dozen or more people in Congress right now who have been in Congress longer than I have been alive. And I'm older than you guys, okay? So you want to find a congressperson because they can be there forever and they can get you money, okay? So that's the best high-ranking sponsor. Number 2, disguise your innovation as a modification. Now this seems to the modern mind insane. Why would you hide it? You want new is good, new is awesome, new is you want what's ever new. Why would you hide it?
Marine Corps did that with the M27 because he wasn't going to let them do that.
Right.
You know,
Because
it's scary.
new can be scary. What else can new be?
Expensive.
Expensive. New can be expensive. You better believe it.
And you can, be secure for the future. I mean, work today, work tomorrow.
Exactly. I don't know if it's going to work. You're talking about this idea. Look at the trials and tribulations of the F-35 fighter, guys. I mean, at least one of those models is still having problems. I can't remember which model it is, but I mean, supposedly the Navy was going to get one, the Air Force is going to get one, the Marine Corps is going to get one. They have had just so many problems with that dadgum thing, right? Please, I'm sorry? Okay. So I'll give you a great example. This was one of my students at Leavenworth told me about. So she was a C-130 pilot. C-130 is the most numerously used transport aircraft in the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force. Of course, the Army doesn't have any because they're idiots. Anyway, so C-130 is great aircraft. It can land, it doesn't need an actual runway. It can land on dirt. I mean, it's a phenomenal aircraft. Well, they were going to do a major upgrade to the point where they were making a new plane, okay? According to her, this was basically going to be a new plane. But the company, I don't know if it was Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, one of those big contractors, they don't go ahead and say, we're going to make the C-131 or 132 or 130, whatever. They call it the C-130J model. So she goes ahead, she'd been a pilot for like almost a decade. She'd flown the C-130 her whole career, knew it inside and out. She goes, well, whenever there's a new thing, you go and they have a mock-up cockpit and you do you train on the mock-up cockpit and everything. She said she got in the mock-up cockpit, she sat down and she said she felt like a brand new second lieutenant who had never flown before in her life. She said everything was so different. And what they did is the whole nose section of the aircraft is just completely different. What they did is they welded basically the old body on this new nose section, and she said it was radically different. She said she really felt like totally unready for this. It was a huge transition. Took her a long time to feel comfortable with the new airframe. But again, the way they sold it to Congress is, oh, no, we're not buying a new aircraft. No. We are buying the upgraded model of the C-1. You guys know the C-130. We've got hundreds, maybe thousands of these things. They're a good aircraft. They've got a solid record, et cetera, et cetera. But she said it was like flying a brand new aircraft. And that's how you get it through. You disguise it as a modification. Number 3, you co-opt top-ranking officers who don't actually support you. Now, how do you do that? How do you convince a big battleship guy to support your air power thing when he thinks air power is a bunch of BS?
Humidify yourself. Say like,
Humiliate? Did you mean
Yeah.
to say humiliate?
Yeah.
Okay, you're getting somewhere. Please.
Pitch cooperation between your stuff and their stuff.
It's a combination of two. You're right and you're right. So it's not just cooperation. It's look.
I need you. to do
No. Even more than that. We all know air power is never going to win wars. We all know that.
you're
Battleships win wars. But here's what I can do for you. I can go out there, I can scout hundreds of miles away, find the enemy, relay that information back to you, and you can sink them without even seeing them. So you were right. It was kind of like humbling yourself. Sort of. In the sense that I'm not the important thing. You're the important thing. Battleships. So you're right in that sense.
Saying it's a mutual benefit.
Yes, but more on you, not me. Because I'm the little guy.
You're more important than I am.
You're way more important than I am. So you're playing to ego, you're playing to their sense of self-worth, all of those things.
Make it seem like their idea.
If you can do that, that's even better. Oh my gosh, if you can make it seem like it's their idea. Those people, I've seen enough of these business types where they talk about doing that. You gotta be slick though. Because I'm not smart enough to convince somebody it's their idea. But those guys that can do that,
Charisma.
My dad's good at that.
is he? Okay. Those guys who can do that, they are like artists. Where they can convince you at the end, you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm glad I thought of that. When you didn't think of anything. I just put all the seeds in your head and they grew. Okay? All right, that's number 3. Number 4, promotion path. You want to make sure that your faithful, i.e. the people who already agree with you, get promoted. Who are most of your faithful going to be?
pilots,
Right.
engineers.
Pilots, but where are they going to be career-wise? Where do you think they're going to be?
Offices.
Down at the bottom. Why? They're younger. Younger minds are more willing to accept new ideas. That is a psychological, sociological, whatever the heck fact. The younger you are, the more willing you are to accept new ideas.
So
My daughter, who's 12, knows how to use my phone better than I do. Why? Because she has no fear. That's what I boil it down to. It's fear. I'm afraid that in the process of changing things, I won't be able to fix things. Like I'll do something wrong. How do I get it back the way it was? I have that built-in fear, right? She doesn't have that fear. She's willing to just, no, don't worry. If this doesn't work, I'll figure out how to fix it. I don't have that feeling. I have this terror. Oh gosh, if I click the wrong button, it's going to take me an hour of looking at YouTube videos to figure out how to undo this.
My dad did that. He actually changed his font to like a max size, and for months he just had the biggest font. And I said, like, why are you doing this? I don't know. I don't know how to change it. I was like, all right, we'll go back. The settings font.
Right. So please.
Can you explain this one more time?
So basically, I didn't finish it. So
Okay.
I'm sorry. That was just the start. So your faithful are going to be your young people. Okay? Now, what I need to do is make sure they, as I age out, because remember, in the military, there's a mandatory retirement age. Okay? So I, General Moffett, am going to get mandatory retirement, and I'm going to be out. And by the way, General Moffett doesn't know it, but his mandatory retirement is going to be mandated by God, because he's going to be dead in 3 years. There's going to be a Zeppelin crash, one of our dirigibles, and he's going to be on it. And he, along with the rest of the crew, is not going to be around. So it's amazing how prescient he was. He realized that he had a shelf life. He just didn't realize how short his shelf life was. So I'm going to be gone. I need people to carry on my idea. So these young people who believe in my idea, I need to make sure they get promoted. Well, in the military, and this is true in the business world, but more so in the military, to get promoted, there are certain things you have to do. You have to go to certain schools, you have to get certain assignments, etc. So he and his immediate staff are going around the Navy making sure all these naval aviators are getting all these positions throughout the Navy.
Also, he used, his relations with, make sure those.
Exactly. The fact he's an admiral and the fact he's on good terms with the rest of the Navy. Nobody hates William Moffett. When we get to Billy Mitchell, everybody hates Billy Mitchell, except his faithful. William Moffett, nobody hates William Moffett. Nobody sees William Moffett as a threat. They see him as he's one of us. He's a battleship guy. He only did this nonsense when he was in his late 40s.
Midlife crisis.
Yeah, midlife crisis. Or he was thinking maybe he'll get promoted because of it. Come on.
He's a sea dog.
I'm sorry, yeah.
A sea dog. I mean, you know that term when you are very
A sea
old?
dog?
Yeah.
A sea dog, yes, a sea dog. Yes, he is. He's an old-fashioned sea dog.
He
Exactly.
doesn't believe really in that.
No, he doesn't. No. We know him. I served with him back on the USS Birmingham. Come on. We were ensigns together, right out of the academy. He doesn't. He's just doing this because he thinks it's going to get him promoted. That's the only reason he's doing it. He didn't believe all this junk about airplanes. Come on, what good are those going to be?
He was a master.
Exactly. So he's going through and making sure all the young people get the assignments they need, go to the schools they need, so that when the time comes, they're all going to get promoted, because I'm not going to be here forever. And like I say, he's really prescient on this because he's got 3 years. 1923 is when he gets killed. I think it's 23.
It's ironic, it was an air accident.
And it's an air accident, yeah, exactly. And last but not least, resist pressure to become independent. You do not want independence. This is 180 degrees off Billy Mitchell, who wants that independent Air Force. Why does he not want to be independent? Is he just too Navy?
Takes away money, right?
That's a big part of it. In fact, that may be the major part of it. If you're your own service, you got to pay for everything. And remember, this is the immediate post-World War I Navy. And again, until after World War II, the U.S. military from 1775 to 1945 in peacetime is so small and so cheap. You ain't getting anything in peacetime. Forget it. It ain't happening. So he says, why would you want to create this new Air Force thing, and then you're not going to have anything? Now, what he doesn't know is it's going to happen during the largest economic boom in American history, and we're going to pour crap tons of money on the Air Force, and they're going to have everything they want, and then some. But he's with the historic trend, which is for 150 years non-war, like 170 years. Peacetime, you ain't getting anything. So he says, you don't want to do that. Stay with the Navy. They pay for everything.
Yeah.
So I'll use the example of the Marine Corps. Every so often, the Marine Corps commandant will give a speech, doesn't matter which commandant it is, and he'll do this whole, we do everything better and cheaper than the Army, and da-da-da, and there'll be grumblings, public grumblings about, we should be our own service. We shouldn't be under the Department of the Navy. There should be a Department of the Marine Corps. Pure propaganda. Pure propaganda. The reason why? The Marine Corps budget comes in thirds. 1/3 of the Marine Corps budget is allocated by Congress directly for the Marine Corps. 1/3 of the Marine Corps budget is directed to the Navy to help take care of the Marine Corps. Roughly 1/3 of the remaining budget is stuff they get from the Navy that isn't earmarked for the Marine Corps. So if the Marine Corps became an independent service, they might lose as much as 1/3 of their funding. They don't want to be independent. Now, would they like to have a more independent hand in doing things? Of course they would. But they're never going to actually truly go for independence because they realize how that works. They're going to give up all that funding. That's crazy. By being with the Navy, they get all kinds of free stuff. Or at least they get to piggyback on the Navy for other stuff. So again, he says, you don't want to do that. You don't want to be your own thing. So I would argue this model, it worked for him in the military, it would work for other people in the military, and I think it works in the business world. If you were in a corporation, or if you were in some other large bureaucratic organization, this is the model. This is the model to use. If you've got an idea, you've got an innovation, you've got something you want to get, that's the way to do it. Because you can do it without making a single enemy, convincing other people it was either their idea or you're just there to help them, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So that's the Moffett strategy. Now, let's move on. Now, the U.S., our first aircraft carrier is the USS Langley. Now, she's a converted collier. A collier means literally a ship that transports coal. Okay, that's literally what that means. She used to be called the USS Jupiter. She is a flush deck carrier. She has no superstructure on her deck. The problem is, she is so early in this whole process. She also doesn't have something else. Do you see this, what looks like a white picket fence in the middle of her deck? The reason she has what looks like a white picket fence in the middle of the deck is she has a giant hole in the middle of her deck. Okay, she has a giant hole in the middle of her deck. She doesn't have an elevator. All other modern aircraft carriers, and by modern I'm talking like the late 30s, have an elevator to lift the planes from the hangar deck to the flight deck. She has a crane with a hook on it. And the way it works is, this is a later picture because you can see these are mono-winged aircraft, is she lowers the crane down, there's somewhere to hook up the plane, and then you lift it up. Well, that sounds all well and good, but this is out at sea. The ship is rolling. Even in the calmest sea, the ship is rolling a little. And if the ship has more than X% of roll, that plane is just going to get smashed to bits as it comes up. So this is a horribly impractical design. And it really, very quickly they realize, oh, this is not going to work. And so they convert her into a seaplane tender instead of an aircraft carrier, and they build real aircraft carriers as a result. Okay, but she is the first American aircraft carrier, at least on paper. Now, for a little while, Moffett is so successful. This is right around the time of his death. He is so successful. The Navy has something called the General Board, and the Navy General Board is almost like the German General Staff. The idea is to have a big brain trust in Washington that's going to make these important decisions for the whole Navy with a bunch of intelligent people, etc. Now, unfortunately, the Navy will discontinue the General Board, and a friend of mine who's a retired naval aviator and a historian argues that most of the Navy's problems have happened since they canceled the General Board, which I think is a bit of an exaggeration because it's been 100 years, or almost 100 years, so, but nevertheless. So how successful is Moffett on paper? Now, this is not all going to come to fruition, but on paper, as of April 1923, this is the Navy's plans for aviation. Every battleship is going to have one observation and 2 fighter planes. Every cruiser is going to have 2 observation planes. Every destroyer is going to have a fighter. They're going to have 9 submarines with observation planes. Okay? This sounds absolutely insane. The only country that actually pulled this off, we never did it, the Japanese. The Japanese created aircraft carrier submarines.
Oh, yeah.
And wait a minute, do I have a picture? Yes, I have a picture. So I'll show you in a couple slides what that looked like, all right? And I'll show you how they launched them from all these ships, because you're probably wondering, did they build a deck? What did it? I'll show you how, okay? Then we have the actual carriers. At that time we had 2 carriers, so they're going to have this large number of aircraft. And then the seaplane tender, that's the Langley that's been converted into a seaplane tender, is going to have 18 seaplanes. So this is how successful Moffett has talked them into an insane amount of aircraft. I mean, destroyers, those are relatively small ships. Somehow we're going to get an observation plane on these suckers? So again, this is on paper. Almost none of this except these two actually happens. We don't do this at all. We don't do this at all. I don't think we do this. We experiment with this and decide not to do it. Okay? But this shows you how amazing this guy was. He convinced the Navy to go all in. We're going to do this. I noticed the number of observation aircraft, and the reason you see so many observation craft is, remember, that's part of the way he sold it to the big Navy. We're going to find the enemy for you, and then you're going to sink them. So that's why outside of the carriers, you don't see a lot of bombers or anything like that. It's almost all observation aircraft. Now, does he think they're going to sink ships? Of course he does, but baby steps. Let's get the planes on the ships, and then over time, eventually we'll have bombers.